given us quite the stack of research here.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're really trying to get a handle on abortion, like all the facts, the nuances, everything.
Absolutely.
And a lot of what you've pulled is from Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's a good place to start.
It is, right. It gives us kind of that solid base before we start digging into the really complex stuff.
Exactly.
So, as always, we're here to help you sort through it all, pull out those key points. Now, we'll be upfront. This is, a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
And our goal here is to just present the information clearly, without taking sides.
Right, just the facts.
Think of us as your guides through all this data.
Okay, I like that analogy.
And every good guide points out those interesting landmarks, right?
Yeah.
And one of the most interesting things is that when we say abortion, we're usually talking about one specific type, like induced abortion.
Right.
But it's important to remember that a lot of pregnancies, they actually end naturally. And Wikipedia says that 30 to 40% of all pregnancies end in what's called spontaneous abortion.
Wow.
Or, what we know as a miscarriage.
Yeah.
And get this, a lot of those happen so early
Really?
that the woman might not even know that she was pregnant.
That's incredible.
It really kind of puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It makes you realize that pregnancy termination in a broader sense isn't as uncommon as we might think.
Right.
But if we focus on induced abortion specifically, the reasons behind that decision can be incredibly complex.
Definitely. So Wikipedia gives this pretty thorough list. But if we were to break it down, what are some of the most common themes that we see?
Well, a lot of it has to do with, birth timing and family size.
Oh, yeah.
Like maybe someone wants to space out their pregnancies, or they don't feel financially ready to have a child, or just feel like it's not the right time in their life.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And that ties back into what we were saying about it being a complex decision. It's not always black and white, is it?
No, not at all. Take, for example, China's one-child policy.
Oh, yeah.
Though it's not in effect anymore.
Right.
It really shows how outside pressures,
wow,
like in this case, government policies, can really heavily influence these personal choices.
Absolutely.
But to get back to those individual reasons, concerns about maternal health are also a major factor.
Right, that makes sense. Because pregnancy, it can have a big impact on a woman's health. Physically and mentally.
Right.
So it's a key factor to consider, for sure.
Yeah, and it brings up a really important point.
What is that?
The legal side of abortion often hinges on this definition of health.
Yeah.
And it's not always straightforward.
Yeah.
Like we saw in those landmark U.S. cases, Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton.
Oh, yeah?
The Supreme Court in those cases defined health pretty broadly. Yeah, including things like emotional, psychological, even family factors.
Wow.
Alongside, of course, physical well-being.
That's a lot wider than a lot of people might assume.
Right.
But with such a broad definition, doesn't that make the legal arguments more difficult?
Yeah.
How do courts even determine if a woman's health justifies an abortion? It seems like there's a lot of subjectivity there.
That's a great point. It shows how tough it is to try to make laws about something that's so personal and nuanced.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
We'll dive deeper into the legal stuff a bit later.
Yeah.
For now, let's stick with those personal reasons.
Good idea.
Which often go hand in hand with financial concerns.
Oh, right, yeah. Because, raising a child, it's not cheap.
No.
The cost of childcare, education, all the basic necessities, it can be really overwhelming, especially for people who are struggling financially.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sadly, this is where I think we see a link between financial strain and the risk of unsafe abortions.
Exactly. When safe and legal options are limited,
right,
or, too expensive, people might resort to desperate measures.
It's true.
Which can be really dangerous for their health.
Absolutely.
This just underlines how important it is to have access to affordable reproductive health care.
Yeah, for sure. It's a reminder that these decisions, they're often made in really complicated circumstances. Personal beliefs, support systems, financial realities.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
And sometimes those circumstances can include really difficult situations like domestic violence or just lack of support.
Right.
And our research shows that women facing these challenges are more likely to seek abortions.
Makes you think, right, that the reasons behind this choice, they're rarely simple.
No.
It's not just black and white.
Right.
They're often really multifaceted and tied to other social and personal issues.
Exactly.
And we haven't even talked about cases of rape or incest. Yeah.
Which bring a whole other level of ethical and emotional complexity. It's important to remember that these aren't just abstract topics, you know?
Yeah.
There are real lives and real stories behind every decision.
Absolutely.
But before we, go too deep into the emotional side of things, let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And talk about how abortion methods have changed over time.
Sounds good.
I have a feeling this part of the research might surprise some people.
It's quite a journey, for sure.
Yeah.
There's a huge contrast between what was possible historically and what's available today.
Right.
If we look back, the methods used before modern medicine, they were often really dangerous.
Wow.
And not very reliable. They used things like herbs, tansy, and pennyroyal.
Oh, wow.
And sharp tools, even forceful massage.
That's scary.
It's hard to imagine what women went through.
I know, it's amazing what people tried.
Right.
But also kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
So thankfully, things have come a long way since then.
Modern abortion methods, they're categorized as either medical or surgical. And both offer much safer and more effective options. For sure. And within those categories, there are a few main types.
Okay.
So medical abortion, which is becoming more and more common, often involves medications like mifepristone and prostaglandin, especially in early pregnancy. And then for surgical abortion, we have vacuum aspiration, also for earlier stages, and dilation and evacuation, which is typically used later in pregnancy.
That's right. And the gestational age of the fetus.
Yeah.
It's really key in deciding which method is appropriate and available.
Okay.
Actually, one of the diagrams you provided shows this really well.
Oh, cool. So knowing how it's done, it makes you wonder, how safe are these modern methods compared to, shall we say, the creative approaches of the past?
Yeah, the creative approaches.
That's what we'll tackle next.
Yeah. I'm ready when you are. Well, in developed countries where abortion is legal and regulated, it's actually one of the safest medical procedures out there.
Yeah, it's safer than a lot of common procedures we might not even think twice about.
It's true.
Honestly, I was blown away when I saw that statistic in the research.
Oh, yeah.
It said that in the U.S., having an abortion is statistically safer than having plastic surgery, running a marathon, or even driving 760 miles.
That's incredible.
It's pretty amazing.
It is. It really shows how effective modern medicine can be when it comes to abortion.
Yeah.
However, it's important to remember that this doesn't reflect the global reality.
Right, of course.
Unsafe abortions are still a major problem.
Yeah.
Especially in countries with restrictive laws and limited access to healthcare.
That brings us to a point that really stuck with me from the research.
Okay, what's that?
It said that the overall abortion rate, it doesn't seem to vary that much between countries with strict laws and those with more lenient ones.
That's interesting.
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does, but it kind of points to something we've talked about already.
What's that?
Restricting access doesn't necessarily eliminate the need.
Right.
It often just drives people to seek out unsafe methods.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's worth noting that countries with stricter laws, they sometimes also have higher rates of unintended pregnancies. Likely because of limited access to contraception.
So it's a lot more complicated than just saying, make it illegal and the problem goes away.
Exactly. It's much more nuanced than that.
But if the rates are stable globally, does that mean that efforts to reduce unintended pregnancies aren't working as well as we'd hoped?
That's a good question. And it's one that researchers are constantly trying to figure out. It suggests that we need to look beyond just legal frameworks. And consider a wider range of social and economic factors.
Like what?
Well, for instance, let's go back to that idea of birth timing and family size limitations.
Right.
Which is a common reason people give for choosing abortion.
It's a phrase that covers a lot, doesn't it?
It does.
It's not just about deciding how many kids you want, but also when and under what circumstances.
Exactly. And those decisions are influenced by so many things.
Yeah, like what?
Career aspirations, financial stability, relationships, personal beliefs.
Right. It's about feeling in control of your own life.
Exactly. It's about feeling empowered to plan your family in a way that aligns with your goals.
And speaking of empowerment, it makes you wonder if the changing role of women in society has played a role in these trends.
Interesting.
You know, women are increasingly pursuing higher education, entering the workforce, delaying marriage and childbirth.
Right.
Could those factors be contributing to the stable abortion rates we're seeing?
It's definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
As women gain more control over their lives, they're naturally going to want more control over their reproductive choices as well.
Right.
And that brings us back to the crucial issue of contraceptive access.
Yeah.
Which is something we can't overstate when we're talking about unintended pregnancies.
It's like that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly.
If we want to address abortion rates, we need to focus on preventing unintended pregnancies in the first place.
Absolutely.
And that means making sure people have easy access to reliable and affordable contraception.
I couldn't agree more. But access alone isn't enough.
Right.
We also need to tackle the stigma surrounding contraception.
Yeah.
And make sure that individuals have accurate information and support.
Of course.
To make informed choices about their reproductive health.
Okay, so we've established that this is a complex issue with deep roots in social and economic factors.
For sure.
But let's zoom out for a moment and talk about the specific methods used for abortion, because our research highlighted quite a few.
And they've evolved drastically over time.
Right. We've come a long way from those risky methods of the past.
For sure.
Today, we have two main categories.
Okay.
Medical and surgical abortion.
Right.
Medical abortion has become increasingly common, especially for early pregnancies.
And from what I gathered, it's usually a combination of two medications, mifepristone and misoprostol, that work together to end the pregnancy.
Exactly. Misoprostone blocks the hormone progesterone, which is essential for a pregnancy to continue.
Got it.
And misoprostol causes the uterus to contract and expel the pregnancy tissue.
So it's basically like a very early induced miscarriage.
That's a good way to put it.
Interesting. So is this the method that can sometimes be self-managed?
Yes.
Meaning women can take the medications at home?
That's right. And while that offers greater autonomy and accessibility, it also raises some concerns about safety and proper guidance.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's kind of a double-edged sword. Right. With both potential benefits and risks.
Exactly.
It seems like that's a recurring theme with this topic.
Yeah.
There are always multiple layers and perspectives to consider.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about the other category.
Okay.
Surgical abortion.
Right.
This is the one that I think comes to mind for most people.
Probably.
And it's still the most common method overall.
Yes. Particularly for later stages of pregnancy.
Okay.
There are different techniques, but the one most frequently used for first trimester abortions is vacuum aspiration.
Right.
It involves dilating the cervix
and
then using gentle suction to remove the pregnancy tissue.
And we've already talked about how when it's performed in a safe and legal setting, it's actually one of the safest medical procedures out there.
Exactly.
But for later pregnancies, beyond the first trimester, the research mentioned a different method. Dilation and evacuation.
Right. Or D&E.
D&E.
That's right. It's similar to vacuum aspiration. But in this case, instruments are used in addition to suction.
Got it.
To remove the pregnancy tissue.
And it's important to be aware that this procedure sometimes goes by a different name.
Oh, really?
Intact dilation and extraction. Or DNX.
DNX.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That term seems pretty loaded, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, it has a lot of political baggage.
Yeah.
Why is there a separate term for what sounds like basically the same procedure?
That's a good observation. The term DNX is often used in legal and political contexts. Sometimes to try to evoke negative imagery or misrepresent the procedure.
I see.
In reality, it's simply a variation of D&E.
Okay.
Used in specific cases where removing the fetus intact is medically necessary or safer.
So it's more about the language and how it's being used to influence people
than
a fundamental difference in the procedure itself.
Right.
Interesting. But getting back to the types of procedures, there was one more mention in the research.
It's okay.
Labor induction abortion.
Yes. This method involves inducing labor. Which leads to the delivery of the fetus.
Got it.
It's typically used in later stages of pregnancy when other methods might not be suitable or available.
But our research mentioned that it's relatively uncommon.
Right.
At least in the U.S.
Right.
And that's due to some ethical complexities, right?
Exactly. Because it involves inducing labor.
Yeah.
It raises questions about fetal viability. and the potential for brief fetal survival.
Right.
Which are topics that are often at the heart of the ethical and legal debates surrounding abortion.
It's a reminder that even when we're talking about medical procedures, there are always deeper ethical and philosophical considerations intertwined with them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that complexity extends beyond just the medical aspects.
Right.
The legal, historical, and religious contexts all play a role in shaping how we understand this topic.
You're right. Which brings us perfectly to the next phase of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm ready.
We've laid out the groundwork, explored the what and the how. Now, let's journey back in time.
Sounds good.
And see how those historical and religious beliefs have shaped the conversation we're having today. It's amazing to think about how long, humans have been wrestling with these questions.
I know, it's fascinating.
Attempts to control or influence reproduction.
Yeah.
They've been around for centuries.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We see it in, ancient texts and folklore, even archaeological findings.
Right.
It seems like humans have always been grappling with, fertility, pregnancy.
For sure.
And the power to choose when and if to have children.
It's a fundamental question, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
So it's not just a modern debate.
No, not at all.
It's something that's been woven into human societies for, forever.
It's a part of our shared history.
But I imagine the approaches to abortion have changed a lot over time.
Oh, definitely. There's a whole range of perspectives, from acceptance to condemnation, depending on the culture and the time period.
Makes sense.
A good example is ancient Rome.
Okay.
Our research shows that abortion was pretty common there.
Really?
And largely unregulated.
That's surprising. Why was it so accepted in that society?
Well, it probably reflects the social structure back then.
Okay.
Women had very limited rights.
Yeah.
And were often viewed as property.
Wow.
Which likely influenced how they thought about pregnancy and abortion.
That's a long way from how we see things today.
Right.
It makes you realize how much these issues are tied to the broader social and cultural landscape.
Absolutely. They're deeply intertwined.
And as Christianity became more prominent in the Roman Empire, attitudes toward abortion started to shift.
Yeah. Early Christian texts often condemned abortion.
Oh, really?
Associating it with infanticide.
That's a pretty big shift. It seems like those early religious doctrines laid the groundwork for the moral arguments against abortion that we still hear today.
It's a valid point. Those early beliefs definitely had a lasting impact. The Catholic Church, for example, has maintained a strong stance against abortion.
Right.
Viewing it as a grave sin from the moment of conception.
Okay.
This stance is based on the belief that life begins at conception.
Got it.
Which is a central tenet of the anti-abortion movement today.
It shows how much religious beliefs can shape people's views on abortion.
Definitely.
But I'm curious, are all religious views on this so black and white?
No, not at all. Our research mentioned Judaism, for instance.
Okay.
Which generally allows abortion when the mother's life is in danger.
Interesting.
This reflects the principle of prioritizing the well-being of the living woman.
Right.
It's a good example of how, even within religious frameworks, there can be different interpretations and moral considerations.
So it's not always a simple religion versus secular views kind of thing.
Right. There's a lot more nuance to it.
But let's step back from the religious aspect for a moment.
Okay.
And talk about how legal approaches to abortion have evolved.
Sounds good.
Because that world map we looked at,
it showed a pretty diverse range of legal frameworks.
It does.
Some countries have total bans.
Right.
Some have gestational limits. Others have pretty liberal access.
It's a complicated patchwork.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's been a long road to get to this point.
Definitely. Our research mentioned that in the 19th century, a lot of countries, including the U.S., started making laws to restrict abortion.
Interesting.
These were often driven by concerns about women's safety.
So they weren't necessarily about morality, but more about regulating a medical procedure.
Exactly. And as the medical profession gained influence, they played a role in shaping those early laws as well.
Interesting.
But as the anti-abortion movement grew stronger, those regulations often became more strict.
Okay.
Shifting the focus from safety to restricting access.
And of course, we can't talk about the legal history of abortion in the U.S. without mentioning Roe v. Wade.
Right.
That landmark Supreme Court decision in 1973 that legalized abortion nationwide. It was a huge turning point.
It really was.
It sparked both celebrations and intense backlash.
Wow.
Which fueled the debate even further.
And as we see today, the legal landscape is still changing.
It is.
With ongoing challenges. And attempts to either overturn or uphold those legal precedents.
It's a reminder that this debate is far from over.
Absolutely.
And while we've mostly focused on the U.S., it's important to remember that this is a global issue.
Of course.
With countries all over the world dealing with their own legal and ethical considerations.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that we've just scratched the surface of this incredibly complex topic.
We have. It's a vast subject.
We've looked at the facts, the procedures, the historical and religious context. But we've also seen how deeply personal and emotionally charged this issue is.
It's true. There's no easy answer.
Right.
Everyone's perspective is shaped by their own beliefs, experiences, and values.
That's a really important takeaway. So, listener, hopefully this deep dive has given you a good foundation of knowledge about abortion.
I hope so.
But it's also hopefully sparked your curiosity to learn more.
Yeah, there's always more to explore. Maybe you'll look into the specific laws in your own country or region.
Right.
Or delve deeper into the philosophical arguments.
Yeah.
Or even the personal stories of people who've been affected by these choices.
Whatever path you choose, remember that knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
The more we understand about these complex issues, the better we can engage in thoughtful conversations and advocate for the changes we believe in.
I agree.
So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Couldn't have said it better myself.